it has to do with collecting the data on those students and the
Okay.
validity of the data with remote learning, and putting that in with um, uh, especially with students on the spectrum.
Okay. So,
Okay, I'm running into some difficulties with that because of students really struggling on the spectrum with the whole remote learning piece, and who also have behavior intervention plans, who are, I'm trying to meet their needs and help them with their struggles, but at the same time also collecting the data necessary. I'm just struggling just like everybody else. So have you guys found anything that works well? Um, I'm almost kind of to the point of this is almost a wash on part of these pieces, because I don't think the validity of any data that I am collecting is accurate. But any input on that? Trying to kind of open the door.
absolutely. I think you make a great point. The first thing we need to think about is, even if we're getting data, is it valid? Is it really a true picture? And I think any conversations that we're having around IEPs or FBAs or anything over the next probably 6 months to a year are probably going to need to be part of that conversation. Is, this is the data we could gain, but we're not sure this is the most accurate picture. Because data through the computer is not necessarily, especially because these aren't kids who chose to do an online high school or chose to be in an online program. That is different. Then there are tools, and you can consider it valid because they've had the training of how to do it. These are our kids that got thrown into this, and then for many of us, depending on the week, are thrown out of it and back into it, and they're in school for 2 weeks and back out for a week. And so that consistency is throwing so many of our kids off. So I think that's the first thing, is just to acknowledge, take the data the best you can, but acknowledge that the data is probably not going to be as accurate as we would like it to be. And that is by no fault of anyone's. It is just COVID times. The other thing that I know some of the schools have been doing, a couple different things. Some of the districts, particularly up north, were reconvening on all their kids and putting specific remote learning, I don't want to say objectives, but remote learning plans into place. So every IEP got added to it, things that would happen only if they're on remote learning. When they're in the classroom, we're going to take data the way we always do. When they're on remote learning, we're going to take data this way. When they're in the classroom, we're going to do the behavior management this way. When it's on remote learning, it's going to be this way. And they've just made it an amendment to every single IEP to cover those issues. If you have an FBA, particularly an FBA BIP, because I think sometimes we find ways to get the academic data sometimes better than the behavioral. I think it's harder to get behavioral data through Zoom or Teams or whatever. It may be worth, if we're looking at having this for a while, it may be worth reconvening that team and saying, this FBA is not appropriate at this point in time. We're looking at being on remote learning for another 3 months. This is not an appropriate intervention plan any longer. And reworking that plan to see if we can make it more accessible and to make it more valid in the type of data we would be collecting. And because we know there are going to be new behaviors that are going to pop up from the remote learning. Now, that's just what I've heard from some of our colleagues up north, from talking to some of our legal advisors and things. Has anyone else found any great tools or ways to collect that behavioral data via online fun? Everybody's got the same answer. Not really. Amy, what specifically are you, is it both academic or behavioral? Or is it more just the behavioral, the stuff for the BIPs?
It is more for behavior. And, it kind of goes across the board. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm seeing more behaviors. Whether the student has parents available or not. And having parent frustrations because of situations that the student is putting themselves into. And I'm talking high school student. But, you know, no real academic goals, mostly just the behavioral. And I keep trying to reach out, keep doing, you know, specific things, had multiple phone calls with parents, with student, and we use Teams for our video piece and have reached out to that student, and just I'm getting some new behaviors, and so trying to address them. And I didn't know kind of where everybody else was on this, so that seems to be one of my big things right now. I don't even have the student in my class. They're in, you know, other teachers' classes. So.
And there's going to be research coming, I know it, but what we're hearing anecdotally and narratively is that we're seeing lots more behaviors from all kids, not just from our kids with special needs or identified FBAs, BIPs. We're hearing so much more about behaviors from our gen ed population. That I think we will have an onslaught of special ed being asked to help intervene and what can we do and those type of things, because we're seeing so many more, and we're seeing kind of that we know that sometimes we get really great partnership with parents and sometimes we don't, but there seems to be a real shift towards parents almost saying, well, what are you going to do with him? He's at home sleeping. He's at home, he won't get on the computer. What are you going to do about it? And at that point, literally, there is nothing we can do about it. You know, but we can't obviously say to a parent, we can't do it, you have to. So it really is a fine line, and I think a lot of people are struggling with that, especially with the older kids, because they can access and turn things on and off and do things that the younger ones hopefully cannot. So what's everybody else doing about, are you even trying to collect data? What are you doing about data collection for BIPs for kids that are not in your specific class? They're not on your remote learning roster.
The things that we cannot do is a lot of times, like, these goals were written before I got a student and before remote learning took place. So you just do the best you can. And that's all I can do, because I have a sixth grader that a lot of his behavior goals were in a structured setting. And there's no way we can address that because he's in a low level of structured setting or unstructured. So I just address the ones I can, and then otherwise just make a note that due to remote learning, because his grandmother is choosing for him to be remote because they have a choice in our district.
Now there is some conversations around writing, you know, due to COVID or writing due to remote may not be enough if parents really want to take it. I'm with you. I don't know what the next option is, but is there a way? I mean, I guess the options that I'm hearing most frequently used and best used are reconvening teams and rewriting IEPs or FBAs, BIPs, or at the very least writing that amendment. Like, if you have somebody you know they're choosing to be on remote, putting an amendment in there that states if family is choosing remote, these particular goals will not be able to be worked on. Something like that, just to cover your district and yourself. It's sad that we have to go to that level, but
we haven't talked as a team to do that yet, because I'm the only one that addresses behaviors in our school.
Okay.
Great. Yeah, because everybody else, I mean, you can do like Amy was talking about, you can address academic goals, but my students all have a behavior intervention plan, and you know, they have the FBA, BIP, and they have behavior goals to go with that. And I took over another teacher's position, so they were written in such a way that he has to be in class. So there's no way to address them. So my mind already is thinking, do I just continue those goals because there's no way he can meet them? And I don't know. Right now he is exhibiting different behaviors. He's doing a lot of task avoidance in different ways, even though he was a task avoider. But now he's just, he's not doing his work. He's not showing up to Zoom meetings, and I am documenting that. And that is my data. And just saying he didn't show up to Zoom meetings, so I'm not able to, address these goals. So I can address some of them when he's with me. If he shows up to his Zoom meetings on Thursdays, but he doesn't.
Yeah, if they don't show up, it's a pretty easy documentation, like did not
That's a
attend.
behavior. To me, that's a behavior.
It is.
I can look at that on that he showed up to these many meetings, and this is what I saw. So,
And even though grandma's choosing for the student to stay home, not really enforcing the need to be on those meetings?
Right.
Okay.
We had a meeting with her and showed her how to do all the Google Classroom stuff that she needed to do, and gave her advice on making him a schedule, and nothing was done. And I talked to him about the one time he showed up to a Google Meet and said that, well, she didn't really make me a schedule, she just made me a list of what I need to do. So he's probably going to be repeating 6th grade.
And that'll be interesting to see how the legal field comes down on that, on being able to hold kids back based on remote learning and things. I know that's a big topic of conversation, and lost time, lost services. Those are all big conversations happening in the field right now. And sadly enough, we're not far enough into this that I think anybody knows the answer. I think we're just all going through it as opposed to, but I do know those conversations are happening. Like, are we going to be required to provide summer school and things for making up services that kids have missed? Are we, and that may be for behavioral services as well. Are we going to be able to hold them accountable for moving on to the next grade? Those type of things. So there's so many unknowns, which is I think what makes all of us feel very anxious, is just not knowing. But you may want to consider, particularly if it's a student that you think that there could be issues down the road, bringing that team together and doing a remote amendment so that it's very clearly lined out what can be done online and what can't be done through online learning. It just kind of covers everybody. And Amy, that may be the same thing for you. If you're having a struggle getting that data, particularly from a given student or two, it may be worth reconvening a team to do an amendment to the IEP.
Yeah, and we did do a remote piece to the IEP where we said specifically how we were going to be meeting their needs. But also, I do like that idea so that I could just have an amendment specifying those specific behavior pieces. And I think that that's a good idea. You brought up the fact that you had heard some information from just things that are going on with this whole remote piece. Would you mind sharing that with us even a little bit more on, because somehow I'm in special ed, we're always talking about the law.
Mm-hmm.
And how is this going to affect us, and where are our directions or our specifics going to be coming from, going forward, because I don't feel like ISB has helped very much through this special education.
No, ISB has really, you could tell from reading the documents, reopening documents, the guideline documents, that it has very much been focused on general education, which makes sense. That's 80% of the kids out there. That's been their focus, but they did not do a great job with really lining it out for special education. Unfortunately, that's who the directives are still going to be coming from. We will still be following whatever ISB lays out there, whether it makes sense all the time for special education or not, or whether it's even outlined for special education. I do know people have been talking to ISB saying, hey, we got to make sure. I do know they are aware of the new CEC preparation standards, so they are staying somewhat up on special education at this time. what I am hearing from, I am kind of the consumer of all webinars, podcasts, anything like that I can get my hands on right now, particularly looking at the legal side of this. I've followed Brandon Wright, who does the legal stuff around for a lot of us around here. He's done a great job with some webinars and things. What we are hearing is, and there has not been an answer yet, one of the big kind of arguments and pushback from COVID and remote learning that we are hearing is this: how will time lost and services lost be made up? This idea of having to, particularly not so much for this school year since we've been able to plan for remote learning, but more particularly for what happened last March and those kids that did not receive services, because some districts and some populations it was just very hard to do remote learning with. Some areas of the state and nationally even not having accessibility, and then some populations not being able to. This is a lot for a lot of people, and so some of our kiddos just can't be on Zoom all day and are not going to be capable of switching their own classes and getting on this Google Meet or that Teams meeting or this Zoom. So there have been services lost. Now, the support services have done a pretty good job. Telehealth is really coming up in the field. So OT, PT, speech language, behavior, those type of services, they've done a lot through telehealth, and that field seems to have been better prepared for this piece of it than education. I don't know if they're doing it any better, but they were better prepared. So right now, I think they're looking at what's going to happen after we come out of this phase of remote learning and after we look at what students really lost. As of now, I don't think there's been a whole lot yet, but I think it's because parents are still in the throes of it. So once we are back to whatever the new normal looks like, that is one of the expected concerns, is lost time. And are we going to have to provide services for longer school days, or are we going to have to provide services for over summers, or what is that going to look like? Are a lot of our kids going to get extended school year? I really thought some of it would come out last summer, but I think just because we're still in the middle of COVID, last summer was all about, are we opening, are we not? I don't think parents have gotten there yet, but they are anticipating a lot of pushback from parents, a lot of due processes based around lost time, lost services. And so that is part of the reason that a lot of these districts have gone to amending every single IEP and every single FBA BIP to state that, yes, this is what we'll do if we're in school. If we're remote, this is what we're going to do, because the feeling that I'm hearing is that remote's never fully going away. I know I work with schools in Indiana, and in Indiana, e-learning has been a thing for many, many years. And so if they have a fog day, where it would usually be a 2-hour delay, they just say, they come across Twitter and the news and whatever and say, it's an e-learning day, everybody be on your device by 9 a.m. And the kids go to school on their devices that day. So e-learning is a regular, there's no snow days in that area, there's no flood days or fog days or anything like that. Kids do e-learning. If the building doesn't have heat because the boiler went out, it's an e-learning day. And from what I'm hearing from colleagues around the state, the expectation is that Illinois will move to that model. Is that we will no longer have snow days. We will have e-learning days. Now, the key with that is devices. Most of the schools that I work with in Indiana have found ways to be one-on-one. So every kid starting in kindergarten gets their own iPad for the year. Because you can't do e-learning even on the fly if you don't have devices. So we don't see this going away. So I would, and this is just my opinion, I would believe we will be doing some kind of form, amendment, something moving forward on all IEPs that states these are the things we're doing when they're in the classroom. These are the things we will be doing when it is an e-learning day. I think we're going to have to start teasing that out because e-learning is probably not going to go away. There's also discussions about, will e-learning be optional? Kind of, Mel, you had said this grandparent is opting for their student to be remote. Is that going to be an expectation for parents moving forward? That they will have the option for kids to be remote? That may be something we'll see, and that's a social trend that we can't predict right now, but it is a conversation happening saying, what do we think is going to happen here? Do we think they're going to want to always have the remote option? Do we have kids who are never coming back to school?